This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior pardoned me, and now I onward go. I know He'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their song of sweetest praise drifts back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
Yeah, we need to get started. We're on the last lesson of the book, Studying Sin Seriously, chapter 13. And I don't think I marked the last part he got to last time. But would you pass them some of those books down to them so they'll have them? Is it part 2, What Will Hell Be Like? Okay, so we're on page 120, and Brother Ramsetti covered the introduction, and in the first part, hell is real, and we were dealing with quite a bit of that. I wonder if we should go back over some of that this evening so that Brother Ramsetti can do what he has prepared. Let's go back to page 119, part 1. It says, there is a hell, the scriptures teach it, heaven suggests it, redemption implies it, and judgment demands it. Why is this important? And why are all these things confirmed in the scriptures? Remember, everything has to do with God. And we're looking at God's eternal nature. And God is going to protect his righteous nature against sin. A lot of times we feel like that what we do is not all that serious, sin and so on. In fact, sometimes people say, well, hell is completely out of line with the little sin I've done. But who is able to evaluate the seriousness of sin? And when we go to the scriptures and we see the consequence of sin and hell, that should cause us to step back and say, this is no small thing. This is really serious. And it has to do with the very nature of God. God is protecting his own nature. His own reputation, I guess we could say. You have an all just God. He's loving, but he's also just. And it'd be somewhat like a person saying, well, if he's all loving and forgiving, then he'll be able to overlook sin. But even in our society, suppose a couple has a young teenage daughter, and that daughter is attacked and she's raped. I mean, let's just put it that way. And there's actually physical damage that is done to her. And the perpetrator is found to be guilty of doing that very thing. And so the sentence is passed, maybe it's a jury trial. And then the judge says, just so that you know that I'm a good judge, I'm a loving judge, I'm going to just overlook what has taken place. What do you suppose the family would be saying concerning where is justice? That's exactly right. The first thing that would come out of that family's mouth is, where is justice? They know that this is not right. We all know that's not right. But if you look at our society as it moves further and further away from God, what's happening to justice? Yeah, it's being ignored, isn't it? And people are they know this is not right. Do we have an extra book? We have a visitor that came in. We are on page 119. We're getting pretty close to the close of our study of this book. By the way, can we have your first name? Lisa. We're glad you chose to be with us tonight. So we're looking at studying sin seriously and being able to see sin from the standpoint of how God describes sin. If we cannot believe in the existence of one, that is hell, we cannot believe in heaven either. One is as much as a prepared place for the afterlife as the other. Now people say, well, I won't believe in heaven, so heaven exists, but not hell because I don't like hell. You know, a lot of times people even in our society are just out of touch with reality. You know, when you look at, for instance, Matthew chapter 25 and verse 46, you have both used together right there. The unrighteous go into hell, the righteous go into heaven. And so we can't really just arbitrarily decide what we like and what we don't like. Sometimes I think that's one of the big problems with a democracy. Don't get me wrong, I think we have the finest form of government available anywhere in the world. But when we start talking about morals and so on from simply a head count, we really get ourselves in trouble. And there have been times in our history that we have noticed that. For instance, is it right? You know, democracy is supposed to be the rule of the majority and so on. Is it right, say, for 51% of the population to oppress 49%? Is it right, we would say, in our form of government, for people, a particular race, to be put in slavery? Now, don't get me wrong, the Bible doesn't condemn slavery. A lot of people have problems with that. But people are enslaved many different ways besides human bondage is what we're thinking, what we usually think about. People are enslaved to their passions. They're enslaved to finances. Yeah, well, I said passions. I wasn't going to say sex, but yes, people are. They're enslaved to sin. In fact, that's what the Bible tells us, isn't it? He who commits sin is a bondservant, is a slave to sin. So here we recognize that there are certain things that are right and wrong without a dependence upon a head count. But our society seems to be moving away from that. Not that we're ever perfect on it to begin with, but we're seeing the problems with it. Number 3, if hell is not real, then Jesus used deception, didn't he? He said, he speaks of hell being real, and hell is not real, which basically says he lied to us. And if we have a Savior that lies to us, can we put our trust in him? You see, a lot of times people don't think through these matters the way that they should. We find this in Luke chapter 12, verses 4 and 5. Let's look at Luke chapter 12. I mentioned this to us some time ago. The latter part of the chapter, which is quite revealing, and there we're talking about degrees of punishment. You remember when it was talking about few and many stripes? But a lot of this discussion begins with the first verse of Luke chapter 12. It says, "In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, 'Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known.'" Then notice what he says in verse 3 as we continue with our reading. "Therefore, whatever you have spoken in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have spoken in the ear of the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops." And here's the passage that they're giving to us here, but I thought it was important for us to pick up the context here. He says, "And I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who is, after he has killed, has power to cast into hell. Yes, I say to you, fear him." So here he's actually introducing the subject of eternal punishment and hell. Hell is beyond what is experienced in this lifetime. But people will convince themselves that they can hide their own sins. And you know, that has always been a dangerous situation. We find people in the scriptures who tried to hide their own sins. David tried to hide his own sins. He tried to cover his sin. When people try to cover their own sins, instead of letting Jesus cover them, they come up with consequences that they never dreamed of. And once again, it's showing us the seriousness of hell, of sin, first of all, is being expressed in hell. So, but according to the passage that we just read, hell is something to be feared. People say, "I don't fear hell because I've decided it doesn't exist." You know, we just go through making up our own truth. I know what's in the afterlife. I know what the existence after this life is. Of course they don't know. There's no way for them to know. Secondly, the author tells us hell is something that comes after death. Thirdly, hell obviously is not the grave. If it were the grave, it would be done, wouldn't it? But we're talking about eternity here. And so, as fear of men leads to wrongdoing, fear of God will lead to right doing. So consequently, if heaven is not real, then Jesus used deception to motivate right doing. Well, we're going to be studying a little bit later several passages, and they're actually in the questions that you're supposed to be filling out at the end of the chapter, of people who will be found in hell. Always impressed with Revelation 21:8. You know, it's sort of who's who in hell, and you go through, and part of that is all liars. You see, so Jesus did not lie. So what will hell be like? Well, first of all, we learn that hell, according to the author here, and remember, in between the lessons, I was filling in for Brother Ramazetti. We had a lesson on hell. What is hell? And we looked at, even though there are descriptions of fire, it's not literal fire. In fact, when in the passage that we just read from Luke chapter 12, hell is not described as fire there. Remember what's described later on in the same chapter? It's a flogging, isn't it? With few and many stripes. And you say, well, why then does Jesus and other authors talk about fire? Well, you'll find that fire was used for divine judgment in the Old Testament. And it's the closest thing that we could ever hope to experience in this life that would describe what hell is like. When I gave that lesson, you remember, as bad as we can imagine burning in fire, what could possibly be worse than that? That's right, being separated from God. Being separated from God. We have never experienced that. No person has ever experienced that in this life. As you read from Matthew chapter 5, God sends his sunshine and his rain upon the evil as well as upon the just, doesn't he? You start with verse 43 and you read through verse 48. So even the wicked of this lifetime still reap the benefits of God's loving kindness. Then it makes us think about the scene when Jesus is on the cross. A lot of times we spend our time going through all the physical anguish that Jesus went through, and we've, how difficult it must have been for him to breathe and all that. And we can really identify that. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about that. But what was the worst moment for Jesus on the cross? Yes, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why had God forsaken him?
Because at that time he was sin itself.
That's right. He was bearing the sins of the world, and God cannot look upon sin. It goes right back to the very nature of God, an all-perfect God. And God has turned his face away from Jesus because he cannot look upon sin. And we're saying, how serious then is sin? Yeah, we can't, in this life, we really fail to comprehend the seriousness and the consequence of sin. We really do. That's why we're having this study. It's a study that needs to be repeated every so many years, because we need to be reminded. Some people have never even considered it. Never. And we're looking through here, and we're seeing all these descriptions found in Scripture concerning the consequence of sin. And the end result is what? Hell. Hell. So he says, what is hell like? Well, he says a place of flaming fire. Well, that's the description that we have. And he gives us a good number of passages that refer to hell as being fire. But let's remember that this fire is not physical fire. We're in a spiritual, eternal existence. Even when the righteous are raised, will we still have the same body? We'll be changed, won't we? And John tells us in 1 John chapter 3, we don't know what we're going to be like, but we know that we're going to be like him. We're going to be like he is. And so if we're talking about physical fire and we're in this body, we're really talking about what? Cremation, right? But this is something that continues to exist. That fire will not destroy.
You have to realize there's not just a spiritual fire, there's a spiritual body.
Right, and we're talking about spiritual death. That's right, Brother Johnson. We have a spiritual body as well.
We take out a spiritual fire that would make even the most human fires seem pale by comparison.
So human beings have a lot of trouble dealing. First of all, we don't even want to talk about death. If we don't want to talk about death, we don't want to talk about eternal punishment either. So in our mind, our attitude, if we don't talk about it, if we deny it, then it doesn't exist. And I've mentioned to you before that there are certain things in life that brings us back to reality. And what example did I give you? You go to a doctor and the doctor says, you've got cancer, okay? And you said, I don't like that. No, I won't accept that. No, there's certain truths you cannot escape. Yes, Brother Bergstrom was next here.
I was just thinking, when I think about fearing hell, I'm thinking about the fact we talked about, yes, being a separation from God, eternal. And if God is the objectionable moral standard, then that means we will be separated from all moral standards.
Mm-hmm.
That means it's a place without morality. And if you think that what we read about how the world was just leading up to the flood, that was still a world with God in it. What are we talking about? A place where there is no God.
In fact, it described it being cast into outer darkness. Just think about the word darkness. What's one of the great descriptions of God? He's light. Even the wicked, the most wicked of this life, have never experienced this type of darkness. Brother Haney?
I think it's important for us, we only have one example that helps us to understand as we pass from this life to the next, that we see Lazarus and the rich man.
Yes, we do.
We see that there were some very key comments that were made during that discussion, which was that the rich man, nor could Lazarus cross the chasm to assist or be relieved from that decision that has already been made.
Yes,
That means it's eternal.
that's right. You know, when we reflect on things like this, it should really cause us to consider how serious life is. yeah, life is precious. When people are not thinking about God and righteousness and the value of life, they don't see other people's lives as being valuable, and they don't see their own. And now we're talking about suicide. As we would say, well, now you're jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, But we know we're not talking literally of that. For them, death is not relief. Was there another hand or? Yes. Go.
I just wanted to go back a little bit. I just wanted to confirm that, so at the end, everyone will have the new body. Those who are going to heaven and those who are not.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
all I just wanted to.
Yeah. We had, years ago, we had a very good brother. I studied with him, baptized with him. He's since gone on to eternity. But he was having a discussion with a friend of his, and some of you have heard the story before. And his friend was denying hell, that there is a hell. And our brother was reading from where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth and so on. He says, I've got you. He says, I have no teeth. And our brother said, don't worry about that. Teeth will be supplied. So whatever is needed in the afterlife is supplied. It is a supply. Brother Ramazzetti, you had your hand up.
Yeah, your comment earlier, you mentioned serious the word serious several times. Thinking through it, we as people, as much as we often talk about the love of God, because we quote John 3:16 multiple times, numerous times, but how often we ever quote Jesus' words on the cross. That's the seriousness of God's love, that He sent His Son so that we may not perish. But yet on the same token, He's very serious about their sin, that even you can't look at His own Son when He was on the cross.
There you go. Yes, Brother Ramazzetti is pointing out, and rightfully so. It's referred to as the golden text of the Bible, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. But think about why God had to give His Son and what it cost both God and the Son. And we begin to understand the seriousness of sin, don't we? Sin is not something to laugh at. We tend to want to make fun of it. And there's nothing funny about sin, especially when a lot of us have been the receiving end of the consequences of other people's sins. And it is not funny at all, is it?
When you start to think about hell itself, it wasn't created for man at all. It was created for the devil and his angels.
Right. That's right.
Which would mean that these are powerful spiritual beings that are supposed to be abiding there. Only them.
That's right. So in hell, we're actually joining them. Yeah. We're going to have some more to say about that the latter part of this chapter. Notice point 2 on page 120. Hell is a place of unquenchable thirst. And of course, going back to Luke 16 of the rich man and Lazarus. What's the point of that statement? Why is hell described as thirst that can never be quenched? Okay, brother.
Be the opposite of what we identify as knowledge of heaven is all
So you think it's referring to?
Here we see just the opposite of hell.
So you're seeing it as a contrast between what we experience with God and what is experienced in hell. Very good.
Which means that you would have unconditionally the same service, whatever that saying, in contrast of the glory of being in heaven, which means that the opposite has to be never ending. And never ending is not only a question of there is no there's no status of, you have 2 levels of pain, and then later on you have 4 levels of pain. The scripture tells us that whatever the intensity is,
Right.
it never relents.
Yeah, it never, and it's the last word I was looking for. It never relents, which means there's never any relief. What did the rich man request? Just a drop of water. What do you think, if we're thinking about literal fire here, how much relief would 1 drop of water give him?
Not much.
I mean, that's hoping against hope, isn't it? Yes, brother.
Well, thinking about the unquenchable thirst, I think of the opposite of it, and I'm thinking of John 4:13 and 14. Christ referring to himself as the living water.
Yes.
There lies the opposite.
And the living water is representative or is an expression for spiritual life. We're talking here about spiritual death, right? In fact, as you're reading through the chapter, there are 2 deaths, aren't there? There's the first death. What is the first death? It's spiritual. The soul that sins, he shall die. What is the second death? Eternal. That's exactly the word we're looking for. Eternal. Now, because we all sin, Romans 6:23, we all die spiritually. That's why we need God's solution to our sin. Sin is our greatest problem, although we don't want to talk about it. In fact, we want to deny that we sin. And once again, we're trying to cover our own sins, which is a very dangerous notion, to say the least. But we're seeing what's going on in our society today. And even in religious circles, those who profess to be Christians, a lot of them are denying that hell really exists. They have some sort of philosophical theory that says, well, if hell exists, then God can't be all good. But he can't be all good if he doesn't deal with sin. All of this, each time, goes back to the character of God. What
Quote C.S. Lewis. There are 2 different people in the world. One who says, God, thy will is done. The other two, God will say, your will is done. One says that God, thy will is done, will go to heaven. Those who say that God says, your will is done.
People will criticize the idea of hell by saying that the punishment is disproportionate with the sin. Okay, I told a lie, so I'm going to hell for eternity. We are not in the position to dictate the consequence of sin. People think that they can argue with God because they assume they know better than God, and that God says, okay, I give up. Yeah, you're right. I can't go through with this because I'm all good. And so remember the one lesson I did concerning this, concerning our dealing with debate we were dealing with a skeptic. This was about 30 years ago. And the skeptic wanted to deny the God of the Bible because of the teaching of hell. He didn't have any problem with heaven, but an all-good God that you read in Scriptures cannot condemn a person to hell eternally. And then we asked the question, well, if God cannot condemn man eternally, forever and ever, could he do so for 1,000,000 years? No, he wouldn't be a good God if he did for 1,000,000 years. What about 100,000 years? What about 1,000 years? And we went all the way down to one day. And the skeptic knew that he was in trouble because anytime he said, God can't do it he can do it for 100 years, but he can't do it for 1,000 years. He's got to be able to explain how that is. When the next person says, well, he can do it for one day, but he can't do it for 1 year. You see, the whole thing becomes so subjective. And it really came down to this. Do you suppose God could do, you naughty boy? No punishment at all. No, he can't do that. Now think about this. We're talking about an infinite, perfect God, aren't we? We've been keeping track of crimes, assassination attempts, and so on. Sometimes the death penalty in civil trials is being determined. And so here you have a human, finite judge determining the sentence of another finite man. Yeah, well, that's what you expect. Yes, the human judge has the right to do that. Well, what about infinite God, who he created in his image, determining to punish man? Finite man. No, he can't do that. See, if God ignores sin, and sin has no consequence, we do not have an all-good God. Maybe some of you have some thoughts on that. What evil is? That's a good question. And it's becoming more difficult in our society to even talk about evil, because you cannot talk about evil unless you have a good by which to measure it. And so, well, what's good? Well, I don't know. Everything is relative. And you can't really nail anything down and say this is right or this is wrong. And this attitude has really spilled over into our judicial processes. Yes, Sister Samarkle.
I think people that think that, God is, because God is good, he's not going to, do things like that. They also don't think about that it's not going to be earthly rules, worldly rules when we go, in the life here. It's going to be about God's rules and about his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be on board with that. That's why we need to.
Because he is God. God calls the shots. We don't call the shots.
We're not going to be held, we're not going to be going to court if we do something wrong up there. We need to already be on board with who God is and what
That's why we prepare for eternity now, in preparation for being with God. You know, when we read, we're not quite there yet, but when we read these lists of who's who in hell, are these the kind of people you want to be with eternally? On the other hand, are these the kind of people you want to be eternally in heaven with? Would it even be heaven? Would there be any relief for any of us? See, people a lot of times want to think along these lines, and they will not allow themselves to go a little bit deeper in the scriptures and start asking themselves questions and consequences of the positions that they have taken. People are very lazy about that. But there has to be an answer for our actions. You know, a person says, "Well, when we die, that's it. There's no heaven, there's no hell. I've taken care of that." Then think about some of the most wicked people that ever existed on earth. People who were responsible for millions and millions of deaths, murders, and they just take their own life or somebody kills them. That's all the consequence there is. You remember when we were talking about Luke chapter 12, particularly verses 47 and 48? You have those who were beaten with few stripes and those with many stripes. In other words, the punishment is proportional to the offense. But you say, well, okay, I'm willing to be beaten with few stripes. I don't want any stripes. Because any stripes that I've received separates me from God. It separates me from... Somebody else had their hand... Yes, brother.
I think it helps us to take it in our mind and understand. We see God's mercy, and we can define it for ourselves, and God defines it with His Word. So why do we have so much trouble with the word just in God? Because if God is telling us the truth in our mercy, don't we expect Him to be telling us the truth in His justice? His justice is there for a reason, and we should be understanding
Yeah,
the parameters of that, because then we understand why there has to be a God.
that's right. When we think about... What he's saying, when we think about the perimeters and so on of sin and what should take place, we know that there has to be a hell. There has to be consequence for what we do. The righteous die, and the most wicked die. So that means it makes no difference how we live this life. None whatsoever. The end result is the same. And in our own minds, in our own spirits, we simply cannot accept that because we know it's wrong. We know that can't be right. By the way, I apologize for being so warm in here this evening. I waited too late to turn on the air. But if I'd turned it on several hours earlier, we'd been more comfortable. Yes, Brother Steve.
It's as simple as the book of law. These many people don't even want to have anything to do with God in this life. You know what? Why would somebody be happy? You lose faith if you don't. It's the very person they don't want to be with any of us.
Yeah. Why would you be satisfied to go to spend eternity with people that you don't want to be with? That's a good question. Well, listen, our time is gone this evening. Next time, Brother Ramazetti will pick up with point number 3 as we continue with our study. And in just a few weeks, we will be through with this particular book. By the way, I would suggest you start working on the questions now at the end. Some are quite challenging, but they're good. I mean, the questions are designed to make us think. Okay, so we'll break only about 2 minutes as we go off